For this presentation, which is the full presentation, in this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will remain in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside of role playing. Some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in simple, practical, common sense terms. Theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness, as well as religious. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part will also be considered a major mistake, although you may use notes. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. I will have a timer. You should have one near. I will try to
perfect, thank you.
alert you when you've got like 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I've been known to get caught up in what you're presenting and forget it.
You're all good.
I'll try to work it out. And just briefly, I'm Stan Botts. I'm retired ethics officer from Verizon, and I serve as Commissioner of Occupational Professional Licensing for the state of Maryland, as well as Commissioner on the Water and Sewer Authority.
I'm Max Mattal. I work for 24 Hour Fitness. I'm a GM for the company, and kind of health and fitness, wellness is kind of relates to me, so I like the whole football aspect of it.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Thomas Dowd. I'm a retired sales executive from the Hospital Corporation of America and recently retired teacher. So welcome. Stan, do you have
Yes, do you have
I use a scoring sheet.
Look at what it's.
do you have any more of your?
Yes, it's
yeah,
not
okay.
over there.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a scoring sheet?
Oh, scoring sheet.
And then just to reiterate for you again, we're speaking to Roger Goodell and the rest of the representative executive committee of the NFL.
Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So good morning, Mr. Goodell and the rest of the NFL executive committee. We'd like to thank you for inviting us out here this morning. My name is Dominic D'Agostino.
I'm Eric Hartman.
I'm Taylor Kaufman. I'm Mary Harrington.
And I'm DJ Rostron.
And we're part of Explorer Consulting Group. And we'd like to talk to you today about how the NFL can move on from its concussion problem. So we're going to go with background. To this day, the issue with concussions in the NFL still remains. Proposing to implement rule changes as of last season have been a step in the right direction. However, the number of diagnosed concussions has increased 16% from the 2016 to the 2017 season, according to the NFL's chief medical officer. So this shows that while it took a step in the right direction, it did not have the desired outcome. This leads to deeper line concerns. The perception that the NFL is facing has changed from what they'd like with the rule changes as a league who is trying to get in front of the problem and trying to make changes, to one that is failing to make changes, and the changes that they've proposed are not working. Fears of concussions and long-term health are not exclusive to the NFL. This is something that is far more reaching from just the NFL. It trickles down, as we'll see later in the presentation, to college, to youth leagues, to high school. It affects everybody that plays the game. So it threats to football. Along with the 16% increase in the league last year in concussions, that was just in the regular season, those 16, 17 weeks. In training camps, there's been a 73% increase in concussions from 2016 to 2017. Now, what happens when players who are risking everything just to make the 53-man roster are unable to play because they're sidelined with concussions? How will potential decreases in interest at the youth level impact the professional game? Is it strong enough to make an impact once it reaches the NFL? And what's at risk? What's the NFL's exposure here? Will concussions and the associated risks lead to a weakened product for the NFL? And will sports like basketball and soccer, who are quickly gaining speed, as we'll see later in the presentation, especially among the weaker demographic that the NFL has, that is millennials and people ages 18 to 34, will a weaker product for the NFL due to concussions, will that leave them exposed to other sports, other competitors? And the NFL and the logo, the shield, it does not break. It is very strong. It faces many problems. We believe this concussion problem is something unlike anything else the NFL has ever faced. And with our desired solutions, we'd like to help you prevent that.
So moving on to the financial aspect of these concussions and how the repercussions could affect the NFL both short-term and long-term. One of the main problems is viewership. Viewership has been declining in the NFL since 2015, where it became stagnant. In 2016, there was a 9% decrease. In this past season, it was near 10%. So more and more people are becoming less interested with the NFL for a lot of reasons, but we feel that the violence of the games contributed a lot to that. The NFL last year has recorded $13 billion in revenue, and you guys expect that to increase to $27 billion by year 2027. That number compared to the other major leagues like the MLB, Premier League Soccer, NBA, is at least $4 billion more than those leagues, showing that there's a huge market for it. But with these concussions and sustained injuries, that number could be on the decline. So comparable ratings. So while the NFL viewership is down by 10% this past season, viewership in other sports such as the NBA is up as 30% in all TV networks as recorded this past December. And even attendance at MLS games is growing, as well as the Premier League streaming through NBA CSN and other kind of networks is up by nearly 70% to about 400,000 people each weekend watching these games. So you can see that. We're comparing these two sports mainly because there are concussions, there are head problems, there's always injuries in these sports, but primarily concussions are down compared to these sports. You don't hear many concussions coming out of soccer or basketball. You hear other ACLs, other kind of injuries. But when you compare it to football, it has a lot of injuries. You can see that viewership is down for the football, but for other sports, viewership's on the rise because these injuries aren't as severe. So when we look at the current TV contract deals, TV providers such as Fox, NBC, CBS, they recently, beginning of the 2014 season, signed 9-year contracts that total over $27 billion. If you do the simple math, that means they're going to be paying around $3 billion annually for the rights to be able to show these live games. TV deals have increased on average of 68.7% per year, according to a study, and since the 1982 season, when they first became major. That first year of the 1982 season, they were paying on average about $240 million per year per provider. So $240 to $3 billion annually. You can see the big jump in how people will want to pay for this, they will watch it. But should this rate continue, the next contract would become almost $4.4 billion annually per TV provider come when it's up at the end of the 2022 season. So are these prices sustainable? So the increase in ad revenue this past season during live TV was 2% to $513 million, which accounts for a large portion of the NFL's revenue of $13 billion. So average price of a 30-second ad increased 50% from about $350,000 to $700,000. And during the 2016 season, it said it costed up to $700,000 per 30-second ad, depending on the time slot. And the financial prediction by 2021, using this math, will cost upwards of $1.4 million per ads, right as the next TV deal kicks in. So the main point we want to show is that while viewership is going down, ad prices to televise during these programming is going up. And we want, So the main point, so this is a chart that shows the NFL viewership by adult in different demographics. This one happens to be by age. The main point I want you to see is that if you look at the third column set of data, where it says age 18 to 34, right here. For the past 3 years, you can see that that's by far the lowest amount of viewership, and it's also the youngest demographic. And you can see it's still on the decline as of right now. This could be related to the Pop Warner football and how parents are not really enrolling their kids in football to start with. So they're not being exposed to football from the get-go, and they're not wanting to expose their immerse themselves in football to begin with. According to Sports and Fitness Industry Association, the number of boys ages 6 to 17 playing tackle football fell 18% within the last 5 years. So that shows that the number actually comes out to about roughly like 750,000 kids less are playing football in Pop Warner. So that hurts the NFL in terms of their legacy. So when you see the NFL, and when you see all those viewers, about average meat of 50 years old, you see that not a lot of millennials are getting into football because they're not being exposed to that at an early age, due to concussions, due to all these head injuries that leave their parents very scared for them. Don't want to, it's your brain. You don't want that hurt for the rest of your life. So in long term, it'll hurt the NFL's legacy in terms of viewership, in terms of merchandise sales, in terms of everything, which we all see decline in everything.
So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the legal issues the NFL faces. As you're aware, in a few years back, the NFL settled a $1.1 billion lawsuit with former players. Ray Easterling from the Atlanta Falcons, who was a safety, was the first to file, and it was actually filed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After he filed, about 4,500 other previous football players had filed with this lawsuit, and more continue to opt into this lawsuit today. So a little bit about the settlement. This actually came right from the plaintiff's case. So it was quoted that the retired NFL players received head trauma or injuries during their NFL football careers, which caused or may cause them long-term neurological problems. And another quote that came from it was, accuse NFL parties of being aware of the evidence and risks associated with repetitive traumatic brain injuries, but failing to warn and protect players against those long-term risks, and ignoring and concealing this information from players. So as consultants, we want to make sure that you guys are aware that we don't want to make sure that we're covering this up anymore. We want to make sure that the players are aware that, or the NFL wants to make sure that the players are aware that the NFL is doing everything they possibly can to make sure that this information is not concealed anymore. So who were the settlement beneficiaries? So it was former players who had played before July 7th, 2014. I'll talk later about someone who actually didn't opt out of the case and was not able to sue. So if you played prior to that, you had to either opt into the case or opt out of the case if you wanted to sue the NFL, if you wanted to sue you guys separately. Also, representative claimants. So basically, if someone was mentally too ill to to opt into this case, they were able to have a representative opt in for them. And also, if a relative was able to, if someone had died from CTE, they were able to sue on their behalf. So what came out of the settlement? So the baseline assessment program is one of the programs that they started, and basically it was that they could get neurological exams and also were able to go through treatment and see if they had any mental health issues, go through counseling, things like that. It was open to all retired players, and later on we'll hear about how we want it for players who are playing at the time now. Also, in this settlement, they were also given a monetary award for the diagnosis. So if you had CTE, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or moderate dementia, you were able to get a payout from your organization. And another thing that they offered was an educational program for former players on the dangers of CTE and concussions. So this was definitely moving in the right direction, the settlement of educating players, but there still needs to be more done by your organization. So Aaron Hernandez was a former tight end for the New England Patriots. He was found in a study by Boston University to have some of the worst CTE ever found with someone his age. His family was looking to sue the NFL, but it was ultimately dropped because he didn't opt out of the case, like I was saying, because he played prior to 2014. But I think what you guys need to look at is you do not want football to be associated with violence. So the media is going to portray that concussions may be the cause of why he turned violent, but we want to make sure that you guys are aware that that's not. We need to get you guys need to get the message out that that's not the reason that he was a violent person. And the lawsuit was ultimately dropped a month after it was filed because they had no argument. So some lower league lawsuits. A small school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Salle University, was sued back for an injury that happened in 2005 for a player who had a concussion happen in practice and then played in the following game. They ultimately sued for 24-hour care because he had speech impediments, memory loss, and other issues. It actually cost the school $7.5 million, and they've since dropped their football program. Another lawsuit that has just come about is the Pop Warner lawsuit, where two mothers have sued because their two sons have lost their lives. Now, both sons they didn't die because of football, they weren't on the field, but at the same time, they're saying that they had CTE, and that was the cause of their death. So the reason we kind of point out these lower league lawsuits for you guys is because we want to make sure that you guys are making sure that although you're one big organization, the National Football League, you're the brand though. So people watch the NFL every Sunday, and that's how their kids get involved. So making sure that it's starting from a younger age, and if these schools and this league is getting hit with this lawsuit, it could end up going away because they can't afford to pay these lawsuits due to CTE.
So I will now go over the ethical implications of this case. And first, I will discuss it in relation to the settlement that Mary was talking about. So I'm going to start specifically with the baseline assessment program. One of the problems with this is that it only applies to retired NFL players. As evidenced by the statistics that Don gave earlier, concussions are on the rise. So CTE is only getting worse and more prevalent. This could be looked at in a positive light from the NFL standpoint. There's more detection of concussions, which is good, but there needs to be more work done in terms of prevention and treatment of concussions. So what about the current players? If they're not eligible to be a part of this lawsuit, something needs to be put in place so that they can get those same benefits in terms of assessment and treatment for future issues. Additionally, this is a very reactionary measure, not preventative. The damage has already been done. At the time when the player receives that baseline assessment program, they've already had those thousands of hits. It's really just a matter of deciding what type of issue they have and how the treatment plan goes from there. And finally, this settlement entitles them to one free exam, but perhaps they want a second opinion that would not be covered by this lawsuit. So looking at the settlement as a whole, as I mentioned, the major issue is that it's a very reactionary measure and not preventative. It's not doing anything to directly lessen the harm of concussions because they've increased significantly in the past season and especially before the season actually started. On moral grounds, monetary compensation does not and should not justify death or incapacitation by CTE or related diseases. And looking at the educational aspect of the settlement, it was extremely broad and generic. So who are the football players involved in this educational program? Is it starting with youth football, high school football, NFL? What exactly is the program and how is it going to teach players about safety? So aside from the settlement, some of the greatest ethical lapses of the NFL is the past 20 years of denial of research. So in 1994, the MTBI committee was created, which is the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. But this had an unqualified beginning. The NFL had a very questionable decision-making process when they appointed Dr. Pellman as the head of this board. He was a rheumatologist and he had no experience in brain science. He also had a very questionable attitude from the start. He was cited saying that concussions are just a risk of the job, they're part of the job, and he was trying to take the focus away from head injuries and put it on what he considered greater issues, such as orthopedic issues, substance abuse, alcohol abuse. So while there have been many denials of research over the past 20 years, there are two that are extremely major. So the first being, in 1997, the American Academy of Neurology released guidelines about repetitive concussions. They were starting to see that link between concussions and long-term neurological problems, and they suggested that measures be taken to ensure that players aren't being put right back into games to prevent that from happening. Additionally, in the early 2000s, Dr. Bennett Omalu performed autopsies on many deceased NFL players, found out about CTE, and published his research. NFL, in response, went so far as to contact the journal that the research was published in and asked for it to be retracted because they claimed it was speculative. So the bottom line here is that an employer is morally obligated to provide a safe working environment. And the NFL has known about this concussion, the danger of concussion, and denied it for the past 20 years. Now, the NFL is starting to take initiatives in terms of fundraising and research and just player safety and education. But the problem is that their credibility is lacking because of those past 20 years of denial. So you as an organization must reestablish credibility for the community watching and the stakeholders involved. And what's important is that the NFL serves as a role model to those young kids or to the high school players, and it's really a moral force throughout society. So it's up to the NFL to set that ethical precedent so it can trickle down to NCAA, high school, and even Pop Warner football.
Now that we've gone through the financial, legal, and ethical considerations surrounding the NFL's concussion issue, we'd like to discuss a solution that we think best befits the NFL regarding this scenario. So now, despite profits being the highest they've ever been, $7.8 billion in 2016, there is cause for concern for the NFL. Declining viewership, decreased enrollment in youth football, as well as legal battles coming in the future at any time. These are all causes for concern that, despite the profits being so high, could pose an issue to those profits in the future. And the solution that the NFL has taken since the CTE was first discussed in the late 90s and early 2000s, a lot of that has been reactionary. More of it needs to be proactive, so the solution is there before the problem even arises. So now, one of the things that we propose a change to is the mission statement. So right now, the mission statement of the NFL contains no wording regarding player safety. It uses words like talking about making teams and communities and the players better, but right now they're letting down the players in the communities by not protecting players, by not setting that standard and precedent for all leagues throughout that are below the NFL. Another thing that the NFL talks about in this mission statement is setting a high standard for everybody, and right now the standard could be set even higher by addressing this concussion issue head on. Finally, the NFL in their mission statement says that they accept responsibility for anything that goes wrong and commits to making it right. This is the perfect opportunity to act on those words and make the right change right here in the NFL. So now, one of the other solutions that we have is adding more independent physicians on the sidelines. According to the NFL Physicians Society, there are 29 members of the medical staff on the field for each game. However, of those 29 members, only 2 of them are independent of the teams in the NFL as a body. By having more independent members, such as neurotrauma specialists and neurological specialists, there would be decreased conflict of interest with the teams and the doctors. Therefore, players who are injured would not be forced back on the field, or not be encouraged to be back on the field by pressure from the NFL coaches or by the players themselves. In addition to this, medical doctors should rotate teams annually. What this means is that while doctors might stay with one team for a particular year, the next year they should move to a different team. Therefore, the potential conflict of interest is lessened there as well. Finally, players should be required to undergo baseline assessment tests every year, just to see if their neurological operations are the same from year to year, or if they're lessening because of hits or concussions. That way they can have the option to make a decision: do I want to get out of the NFL because of the concussion issue, or am I okay to stay in? Another thing that we propose is establishing a greater relationship with the NFLPA. Now, as with any labor union and the company that they're working for, there will always be tension. It's unavoidable. However, the relationship could be improved significantly. There's a disconnect with fans right now because you're seeing millionaires fighting with billionaires, and that's just not connectable to the fans. In addition to this, better communication will lead to better safety. If players are involved with the decision-making process for new rules, which they were not in the most recent rule changes, it will lead to better safety, and they'll be able to provide their input and make the best solution possible. Players came out following the new rule changes, saying that they did not think the rules were actually going to help with concussions at all, or with player safety at all. Finally, the settlement benefits that were included as part of the legal settlement should also be extended to players that are currently playing in the NFL with neurological disabilities or neurological disorders. Their families, as well as themselves, are suffering greatly, even though they're not retired yet. And there should be some kind of fund set up to help them manage the care that they need on a daily or annual basis. Lastly, the NFL needs to take initiative. More research, they need to provide more research and funding outside their own organization. What this means is providing funding to organizations that are developing helmets that have hit trackers or hit monitors, just to let a medical doctor on the sidelines know, look, this hit was too bad, he should not be on the field anymore. In addition to this, there should be more funding towards research for CTE in living players. While right now, the CTE can only be discovered in dead or post-mortem players, there is research being conducted currently right now that will help diagnose CTE in living players. And while it's not required, active participation will improve public perception and will prove that commitment to player safety that the NFL strives to make. In addition to this, the NFL needs to promote concussion awareness in youth football, whether it be high school, NCAA, or even Pop Warner. The NFL is the picturesque body of football in all of the world, and they need to promote that, look, we're committed to player safety and we'll follow suit in all the other leagues that fall below them. Finally, the NFL has no problem making commitments to cancer awareness or armed forces awareness, and there needs to be the same thing done for brain or neurological disorders, as well as concussions in general. The Breast Cancer Awareness Month since 2009 has raised $18 million, and while that number might not seem like that great, the commitment that it makes to other people, the patrons of the NFL, the fans of the NFL, it encourages them to go out there and provide the same funding and the same donations to those organizations that are helping combat these problems. So by raising the bar for safety in the NFL will set a standard for all of the world and set the standard for protecting the youth of America and all around the world.
Just to reiterate that last point DJ made, we feel very strongly that an initiative like a Brain Cancer Awareness Month and CTE Awareness Month, we believe NFL with its immense platform, especially in this country, has a tremendous opportunity for social responsibility to make a push for not just football hits, not just head problems that might come from football. Head injuries in America are largely undiagnosed. Kids suffer them all the time, whether it's through sports, whether it's playing in the backyard. We think the NFL is a great opportunity to make these head injuries more aware and to encourage individuals to seek medical attention if there is a suspected head injury. Thank you guys. Any questions?
Okay, well, let me start and say that I learned a lot from this presentation, something I knew a little bit about, and probably spurred even more questions. But as commissioner and the executive responsible for the NFL, we have a product, and we're trying to put out a product that increases, as you've shown, viewership. And you talked about viewership, and it appeared that it was primarily through TV viewership.
Yep.
I'm wondering, do you have any analysis of what the impact has been on live viewership in terms of coming to stadiums and watching the games there?
So that, I'm glad you asked that question. I could put in the presentation because we had time restricted. But in terms of demographics, they have seen actually a decrease in terms of viewership at games, depending on which city and demographics you are. So if you're in Philadelphia, where you have passionate fans like the Eagles, and you have a strong market sense of the NFL, you're gonna have a great turnout. You're gonna sell out a game every time, so you have no problems in that market. But if you have a team like Cleveland Browns, where they've been down for so many years, and you have no players, you have no product on the field. You have a product, but you don't have like a very strong product of people that want to go see. They're not going to show up. So it's all dependent on the viewership, is dependent on the players on the field, the product. But if they don't have a strong sense of product or a strong sense of that culture on the field, you can see that not many people are going to turn out for those games.
Just to follow up to that, did you happen to do any sort of analysis on CTE injuries and others, and aggregate them by teams, where we could possibly see if the Philadelphia Eagles, better example, let's use the New England Patriots. If the New England Patriots had a multiple number of CTE infractions, and look at the Aaron Hernandez case, whatever, is there anything that correlates to a specific team, or maybe even a division in terms of their viewership?
I don't think we see a correlation between teams. I think it's happening across the NFL. And part of the ethical and moral dilemma is that teams sometimes are not reporting this. They're not telling you, oh, it's not an honest answer. Because if you think about it, these players are getting put on the field, and this is their livelihood. They don't want to be taken out, because if they get taken out, they're not getting paid. If they don't get paid, obviously they don't have anything to look for in the future. So this is their livelihood, and you can even see this in college football. Coaches in college football, they're pro-level coaches. They know exactly what it takes to get to the NFL. They know exactly what the player needs to go through to get to the NFL. If they have concussions, then teams are going to be a little bit more suspicious, especially with the rise of concussions in the NFL. It's only going to get worse if they get to the NFL as well, because the hits get harder, the stage is bigger, everything. So I feel like, no, we don't see a correlation between teams. You have to see that it's happening all across the NFL. It's not happening stronger in one division or the other. It's a very prominent problem across the league, and it's not a correlation.
I would say going off of that, looking forward, that could definitely be a part of what we're trying to say with investing in new research, especially CTE in living players, because as of now, it can only be found in deceased players. The records aren't necessarily there for every team. So perhaps that's another solution going forward. We set that precedent that teams themselves need to start taking records of CTE in their deceased players and perhaps someday CTE in their living players. And then we may be able to give you a better picture of if it's team related or if it's overall, but as of now we're seeing that it's pretty much an overall NFL problem.
On top of that, in order for the brain to be tested for CTE, a deceased player needs to, before they die, they need to commit their brain to science. And so while there might be numbers out there, they're going to be very minimal and not represent the entire population of deceased players as a whole. So,
and just to wrap up with the original question, while the numbers might not be specific to one team, we want to make sure that no team is incorrectly reported. And that's why we want to declare absolute independence with the doctors. We want the doctors' goal and motives to be completely separate from what the NFL wants and what the teams want. The most recent issue I can think of is Russell Wilson this season. He suffered a hit that everyone believed that's a concussion. He went to the sidelines and he entered into the pop-up blue tents, and he immediately went back into the game. Now, whether it was the doctor misdiagnosing or was Russell Wilson spurring on the doctor and really begging him, I'm fine, please let me get back in the game. We believe a complete independent doctor will take that player off of the field and take him out of the moment, get the adrenaline down, because that can cover up a lot of injuries. We want the player to enter back into the locker room, get off the field, off the center stage from the fans, get the cameras off them, and we want also the relationship to be fresh. We think if a doctor knows the player and the player knows the doctor well, we think the doctor is more likely to feel bad and take the player's opinion. Unfortunately, sometimes you cannot always trust the player's opinion, and you have to protect them from themselves. We think by keeping the doctors fresh on each team every year and independent, it will alleviate that problem.
What if I were to say to you that, yes, the concussion figures are up to your point, 16%. How much of that is tied to a better understanding of the injury, of our increased ability to diagnose it in the first place? So maybe what we're not seeing is an increase in concussions per se. What we're seeing is because of our ability now to diagnose them, they're out there, we're just finding them.
Sure, and that's a very good point. And if that is the case, we can't be 100% sure, but we do believe that the NFL has gotten it right in their increase in diagnosis. We think they're doing a lot better job of diagnosing these, especially in practice. 73% in training camp, that's certainly not just a new thing. Our suspicion is that concussions weren't being tested on the 90th man, the guy who's not even making the cut to the 70th people, much less the 53-man roster. And with that, we think, on one hand, we're doing a very good job of diagnosing the problem, but that does create another problem that needs to be addressed. The solution cannot be, well, hey, we're doing a better job of finding the problem. And with that, especially paired up with the rule changes that were supposed to prevent these concussions, it's just not a good look for the NFL, and we'd really like to take control of the narrative. So.
Next.
I kind of actually had a question, so you guys talked a little bit about proposed rule changes. Do you guys have any data or analysis, how the rule changes have significantly lowered the number of concussions, anything?
Not directly from the rule changes correlated directly to the number. However, we do know that the NFL does not want to eliminate the kickoff. However, they want to deter players from returning the ball, because that has been labeled the most dangerous game in the NFL, or the most dangerous play in the NFL, in the NFL's game today. So by moving the kickoff off, so it's more likely that a kicker will put the ball through the back of the end zone and cause a touchback, as well as if a player catches the ball in the end zone, he's more likely to take a knee because the ball will be advanced further up the field. So it's more incentives to not let that play develop, where you can see things like blindside hits or other possibly concussive hits. And what we've seen is NFL coaches are really smart. They know that the ball is being moved up to the 25-yard line. So what are they telling the kickers now? Kick it a little bit shorter. Put the ball on the edge of the end zone and make the player return it. Now the player should down the field quicker, and actually that might be making the play more dangerous. So we believe the effort was there for the NFL certainly to deter these kickoffs, and of course penalties for possibly dangerous hits. So targeting to the head by defensive players, that's definitely going to make a defender think twice before lowering his head and trying to knock a player out of the game. However, unfortunately, the results were not what the NFL desired. So we think there needs to be a step further with those rule changes. It might make make the game a little bit different, might look a little bit different, but the NFL must keep player safety at its utmost importance.
What if someone were to say that if you look at the NFL, we're in the entertainment business, and we have a relatively small sampling about rule changes. We want to do these rule changes. Player safety is important to us, but we're in the entertainment business. And we are up front, we haven't always been, but we're more up front than we have been about the dangers with CTE and concussions and techniques in tackling, etc. But the young men who join us willingly, and they know the facts, and we're open about the facts. And yet we have a consistent demand for players. What's wrong with that?
Sure, and we think this is a long-term deterioration of the game. And we think if right now the problem is not too large, there is a great talent level, there's a great talent pool coming from the college game. But we think if parents get wind starting the kids at, not even if they take them out of football altogether, but maybe they move the age of starting their children in the game from 12 to 15 or 16 once they get to high school, how does that affect their development? Now what talented player are you getting? Are they going into college as a more raw player? Do they not have the skills developed as much? Are they leaving college a more raw player, skills not developed as much? So is that going to end up changing the way the game looks? The game is constantly evolving, and we think, again, by having a stronger relationship with the NFL Players Association, the players might have ideas and they might be more willing to make changes. It might not be as many big hits, and we love football because it's a violent game and there's nothing like it in America. That's what makes it unique to America. But if the game's changing a little bit, we know players are getting faster, we know they're getting stronger. There's a lot more exciting plays in football these days than just hits. And maybe DJ can highlight that a little bit with his talk on how much more likely a player is at age 12 to get a concussion rather than if he enters.
So a statistic actually shows that a child who starts playing football at the age of 12 is more likely to have CTE at, like, say, 32, like Aaron Hernandez, than someone who started playing at high school at the age of 14, 15. So there are statistics that are showing that if you're playing later on, you're being taught more properly. So, for example, if you're playing a Pop Warner, you're more so not being taught. You're being taught how to hit with your head up, but most time an 8-year-old isn't going to hit with their head up. So that impact every time they're playing from, say, 8 to 14 is hurting their brain even more than that person who's just starting at 15.
And maybe this is not a rule change in the NFL. Maybe the NFL game stays as it is. Maybe there's a rule changes at age 8, age 10, age 12, up until high school. Maybe it becomes a little more of flag football. Maybe it's arm tackles only, like rugby. Or maybe there are greater initiatives. There is the heads up program that coaches learn that you should keep your head up when you're hitting. If you're driving a car, you don't want to take your eyes off the road as you're going towards a collision. You want to keep your head up and you want to deter from that. Players should be the same way. They shouldn't put their head down and run into another player. They should be looking to bring them to the ground as effectively as possible. And we believe those rule changes at the youth level could improve tackle, and so that's less dangerous and even more effective possible.
Is there too much responsibility being put on us, the NFL, for diagnosing this and recognizing concussions? You know, this is an entertainment business, but it's also a pipeline, and it starts at a very, very young age. And what we hear a lot of is that we at the NFL should be doing the diagnosis and monitoring for concussions and all, but let's just say, for example, is there any data that the Division I colleges or all colleges who have football teams have where they keep the number of concussions that a player may have? The example that comes to my mind is that the level of injury that Aaron Hernandez had, it didn't just occur at the NFL. And there may have been some possibility that if data was being kept, that we at the NFL may have known that, wow, this is a pretty significant situation we may be getting into. Information that could be shared with teams and owners and doctors that, unfortunately, you may say to a player, it's not in your best interest or ours to have you in the NFL. Is any of that data?
Yeah, so that is available. So actually, every college is now required to report every injury. So they'll have a software database where they report every injury, when the injuries occurred, how it happened, practice in the game with a concussion. And now the thing is with the college level though is they don't have the right to tell you can't play after 3 concussions or however so it is. There's actually an IndyCar racer, Dario Fenichetti, who walked away after 5 concussions from a professional sport. But I think that's also a thing that we could look in, as consultants, we can look into for the NFL is, you know, do we set a rule of, okay, if you have had 3 concussions, unfortunately you have to walk away from the sport because it's going to just hurt your brain that much more.
If you could, we're busy guys, we get stuff. If you could cut to the chase and say, we'd really like you to do this one thing first. All the other things have merit, but we really, if you want to control the narrative, you've got to do this one thing. What would that one thing be?
I think you have to go to the NFL Players Association and sit down and say, look, we haven't done a great job in the past, but right now, your safety is the #1 priority. We want to make the game safer for you. Please help us help you. And among that, we want to help your communities. We want to help the entire country become safer in this game. Can you work with us? If we make the game safer for you, we provide testing, all of this. In the off season, can you guys go to your local communities and can you teach safer tackling? Can you make the game safer? So it's not just getting safer at the NFL level, but can you make it so that everyone in the country knows that the game is getting safer at every level?
Yeah, it's really about setting the precedent because the NFL is such a large organization. It's so well looked upon by youth and by the parents and everything that the NFL really needs to set the precedent and say, look, we're taking this player's safety issue very seriously, and it will trickle down to every other organization that falls below it, from youth to high school to the NCAA. And I mean, that's the most important part, keeping everybody safe, whether it's your players or whether it's the players that are just starting at 5, 6, 7 years old. So
down to that point, that those 5, 6, 7-year-olds are looking at those players making those hits. So when you see a safety come up on a wide receiver and he's your favorite player, he makes that hit, everybody cheers and everybody's like, oh, good hit, great hit. He's gonna want to do that in his own game and make it. He wants to be like you. He idolizes you. So for him to come to your community and be like, listen, that's not the way you hit. That's not the way you hit. This is how you should hit moving forward. That'll speak volumes to him, and he'll listen to them. He'll actually take that into account. And be like, this isn't some coach that I may not know at a personal level. This is my idol. This is my role model. This is who I want to be when I grow up. And when they do that, that'll speak volumes to them. That'll make them a better player moving forward and have them a longer life in the NFL or in football.
There's another industry that has a pipeline that I think probably has concussive injuries that are equal to or equivalent to, and I've heard no mention of it. And I'm concerned that there wasn't any look at that, and that's the military. The military, we have folks, kids who see their dads in the military and they grow up wanting to be a military man. And the number of concussive brain injuries that occur based on their being deployed in these areas bombs and crashes and whatever. It's probably comparable. And I wondered, did you do any sort of comparison of the NFL to the military and also to what we're doing here in the NFL to manage the situation versus what the military is doing to manage their situation?
Sure, and we don't have statistics for the military. Obviously, it's a different occupation. They face different hazards. But we believe what the military has done over the past 10, 20, 30 years, especially following the Vietnam War, is they provide medical services that last longer than when you're actively serving in the armed forces. And something that I think, again, with the initiatives, it's not just CTE, it's not just a concussion. There is a real mental health problem that comes as a result of these. There's depression, there's anxiety, and there's PTSD, which exists post-concussion that may exist after active combat. So we think that the NFL can take research that's already done about these problems, and we believe they can follow in suit. And that is, a lot of it can be reactionary, so things like offering counseling. Maybe offering counseling while players are actively on teams, on the rosters, they're actively in the game. And please remove the stigma from mental health. Allow players to seek counseling and mental health positions and let them know that it's okay. You're still an NFL player, you're still a tough guy, you're not too soft to play the game because you have mental health concerns. And that's really a stigma that the military is making motions to remove. And we think that's something that the NFL can certainly follow suit with.
All right. Thank you. Good job.